Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with remarkable guests. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today we are thrilled to welcome Justin Brown. Justin.
Hey, thank you, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, Justin is the founder of the HillVets Foundation and CEO of the Nimitz Group, a leading consulting and lobbying firm focused on technology, healthcare, and veteran policy. Through HillVets, he has championed efforts to empower veterans and military families, most notably through the foundation's fellowship program that places veterans in impactful roles across government and advocacy organizations. With nearly 20 years of experience, Justin has held leadership roles at the VA, VFW, and American Legion, and served as staff director for multiple congressional subcommittees. A U.S. Navy veteran, he completed 3 deployments and later earned degrees from the University of Utah and the U.S. Naval War College. A native of Utah, Justin is passionate about the outdoors and mentoring the next generation of leaders. And I am so excited to have him on Tipping Spears. So thank you, Justin, for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
So can you tell the audience where your story begins?
Wow, where it begins. Well, I mean, I guess it's a story of chapters in many ways, but yeah, I mean, I'm a native Utahn, as you mentioned. Joined the Navy when I was young, 17, and did 3 deployments to the Middle East. It was actually my first deployment when 9/11 happened. We were on our way back from Hawaii, heading to California, and obviously that changed a lot of things. And we came back to San Diego, and then hit what's called dry dock in the Navy, which is worse than the deployments. You basically become a shipyard worker. And then we deployed for the invasion of Iraq in 2003, dropped off our Marines and came back, picked up more Marines, and then dropped off more Marines in 2004 and brought the ones we left there the first time. So yeah, I got out of the service, and I did aviation electronics. I was mostly fixing Marine rotary, so helicopters. And it was it was kind of a techie, job. And I was young, and I was frankly, I was confused. I didn't really know how the heck we got into the situation that we did. I mean, obviously I knew we'd gone to war, and I think I had some fundamental understanding of why, but I felt like there was a lot to unpack there, and it really truly kind of piqued my curiosity. And so getting out of the Navy, I'm 21. I didn't know that it was the end of my military service. But I knew I wanted to go to school. And so started my generals, and frankly was just not as excited about, something like that would have made more sense from my, naval background, which would have been like, I don't know, electronic engineering or, something to that capacity. And just found myself so profoundly curious about society and people, and why do people do certain things. And for me, a lot of it all came back to this question of like, how in the heck did I end up on this ship launching Marines, into this, foreign country that I have really no concept of what it is or where they're from. And so, yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, I think my story kind of, becomes a unique story kind of, I think, at that time. And yeah, so went to school, came to DC, and yeah, but I'll stop there for now.
Oh, that's so enlightening. So what first sparked your interest in serving in the military at 17?
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I mean, I come from a family of veterans, and for me, it was never a question of what whether or not I was going to join the service. It really was just a question of what branch. I have numerous grandfathers that were and I say numerous grandfathers because there's some generational divide in some of them, and so I have both a grandfather as well as a great grandfather who were World War II veterans. And then, I have two uncles that were Vietnam veterans. And I spent a lot of time. My grandfather was a bit of a history buff, and so he collected a lot of various army patches and combat patches and unit patches and all of those things, and he put them in these cool I don't know if he'd call them shadow boxes, but just display boxes.
Yeah.
And and he was also an incredible storyteller. I mean, my uncles all told me he was a liar, but I don't know what was true or not true, but I know they were very entertaining and exciting. And so he spent a lot of time talking to me, and always made time for me. And I was always so, it just sounded like, you know, sheer adventure. I think if I would have spent more time talking to my uncles who did, who were experienced Vietnam and who were both combat Vietnam veterans, like they may have impressed a different, situation upon me, and I learned a lot more about their stories much later in life, which was kind of crazy because I didn't. I had a close relationship with one of them, but he never talked about the wars. And then I didn't have a relationship with the other one at all until I myself had come back from war. And then he just like
Yeah.
really engaged me, and he became one of my best mentors. So
Yeah.
that's the very long answer, but and then in choosing what branch, I made the offer to both the Army recruiters as well as the Navy recruiters. And, the Army guys were like, "Hey, you want to come blow shit up?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, of course. Of course I want to blow shit up." And the Navy guys were, "Hey, do you want to go see the world?" And, in terms of context, I mean, I think it's 1999. I felt like not a lot's going on. I'm like, I'm going to get stuck at Fort Wachamachuca.
Yes.
And that's not a real fort, but in the middle of God knows where. And yeah, I might be able to blow some stuff up, but I'm going to hate life and not go anywhere. And so I figured, I might as well get a chance to go see some stuff. And so I joined the Navy, and I also got to blow some stuff up.
Well, it's so cool to hear kind of how those seeds were planted, the stories you heard, and how they inspired you, kind of with that military connection. So I know you mentioned your uncles. Was there a particular, person or an event that served as kind of a catalyst for your career, maybe after the service?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly my uncles, but I also, and I know these guys get a lot of, or I feel like they get a lot of flack in today's veteran, community. But I joined the VFW. I mean, my uncles
Yeah.
were both VFW vets, and they drugged me in there. I didn't know what I was getting into, and in short order, they gave me some title, which I had no idea what it was. And like my first job was, to organize a picnic, like I don't remember what it was, Memorial Day or something like that. And but I learned so much. I learned so much from these older World War II, Korea, Vietnam veterans, and it was such an amazing opportunity. And I also met my best friend there, and we're still best friends today. And he was an Army vet, OIF. He was a tanker type guy, and we're in fact we had an old comrade just die the other day. He was an old Marine, and he does a better job. He still lives in Salt Lake, so he does a better job of kind of keeping track of most of these guys. But I mean, they're almost all gone, and but so much wisdom in the room that these guys shared with us. So it was an incredible experience for me, and I feel really fortunate to have had kind of a room full of these older veterans who had lived many more chapters of life than me, and were able to convey some of the pros and cons of their choices in life. And so yeah, I mean, yeah, I give a lot of credit to those guys.
Yeah, I love how you kind of phrased it as, kind of It's funny, the multiple chapters that it's almost like they were farther along on the journey, just generationally, and you can kind of see that coming in, and then the wisdom they can share um, can be so impactful, and it sounds like incredibly inspiring. So I know you've not worked, you have led initiatives, starting your own nonprofit, starting your own business. Can you tell us a little bit about how being a veteran influenced your career journey into entrepreneurship? So, starting your own organizations, how did service tie into that for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, for me, some of it comes back to a story of an old mentor. And, we were in the tech shop, and his name's Ricardo Garcia. And at the time, he was my second class, and I was the third class. So really, he's only my boss by one, but he was totally my boss. And he became a first class very soon after. So then he was really my boss. But, that was just a lowly, E4 third class petty officer. But he, he came into the office one day, and he was just so he had the best, and still does. I mean, you might call it OCD, whatever you might call it. But I mean, his level of attention to detail, unprecedented. And I had my, I'm sitting back, I'm in my work uniform, I've got my boots on the desk, and he just kind of lost his mind. And he was like, what are you thinking? Like, that doesn't, A, it doesn't look professional, B, like, your boots are on the desk, and like, and that always really stuck with me, because it was, this idea of, just not presentation, but also, kind of a commitment to excellence in terms of the space around you, how you present yourself. And in many ways, I don't think I'll ever be Ricardo Garcia, and I love him, and we still have a great relationship today. But I think having that awareness of what can we do to try to make this space better? What can we do to try to make the environment around us better? A lot of these things that I learned in the military, in terms of that, commitment to excellence and that commitment to attention to detail, really do matter, and they really add up. I mean, you can think that little things don't matter, but the reality is, those little things snowball into excellence. And that might be that you're committed to getting the little things right, and then therefore that snowball kind of grows. But I think if you look past those things consistently and constantly, you probably have kind of like the opposite of excellence. And so, like, everything's out of hand, everything's unruly, and I think it's hard to lead in those conditions, right? And it's like, everything goes, or everything's all good. I'm trying to think of the opposite. It might be just kind of like the Rasta life, like, like, don't worry about it, like, and I just think it would be hard to lead a team to excellence kind of with that commitment. I mean, you've really got to kind of lay down the idea of, like, some things matter, but you also have to be able to convey why they matter. And so, that's at least, one of, I think, many things. I mean, I think, they're kind of the common traits that people like to focus on, which sometimes that's attention to detail. Sometimes that's, we wake up on time, show up on time, and some of those things. I find those to be stereotypes. I remember a lot of sailors that never showed up on time. Always looked like, always looked hosed up. So I think more often than not that's tends to be true. But there were certainly some folks that didn't live by some of those commitments. But I think certainly the structure of the military, if you bought into it, I think can certainly help propel you. But I do think there's a lot of truth as well, and kind of this idea of, I do think what most service members share is, they've been put through a gauntlet of stressful situations, right? So I know for me, getting out of the military, I mean, college was pretty easy. Like it was, like I knew that the only reason I should not get straight A's in college is because I kind of like half-assed it, like, there was no other real excuse other than like, are you going to do the work or not do the work? And so, um, and it I think gave me the experience and wisdom even at a young age. Then 21, I felt like I was old in college, but looking back at it now, I was fine. But I think it certainly gave me the wisdom to be like, this is a choice you can make. And being honest, like the first semester of school, I kind of made a choice and I sloughed off. I went snowboarding pretty much the whole time. I rented a place at the bottom of a beautiful ski resort in Salt Lake City, and really kind of I thought I could half-ass it. And then luckily I only took 2 courses, and I got my grade card back, and I was like, that's it. I'm never doing that again. I didn't spend 3 deployments to the Middle East and a dry dock to get this educational opportunity to get passable C's. And from there, I pretty much got straight A's.
Yeah. No, that's kind of a great example of your kind of, seeking excellence, attention to detail in action there with your academic pursuits. So I know veterans are very engaged in entrepreneurship. There's a lot of interest with transitioning service members and veterans starting their own business. Do you have any kind of lessons learned from the trenches in that, in terms of if you were to give advice to a veteran that's interested in starting their own business, is there any kind of like key nuggets you would like to pass on?
Yeah. It is a very difficult thing. I think I do think it's worth pursuing. I think that having some concept in mind of how fundamentally at the end of the day that you're going to make money at the end of this enterprise is really important to start with. And I would say start small as well. I mean, I'm branching out into some different enterprises now, and I know I don't know a lot about kind of what I'm sticking my toe into, and I think that starting small and trying to figure that out and to figure out what you don't know can be really important. And I think that the more you do kind of know about a certain segment or area can be very practical in starting businesses. I started both HillVets and the Nimitz Group in a business incubator, which was pretty cool. And I got to meet some really other incredible entrepreneurs, including other veteran entrepreneurs. And I think what I often saw was the folks that were the most successful, I think they either had generally kind of one of a couple things, and there could be more, but I think one was quite a bit of experience in whatever they were kind of stepping into. Like they'd already either worked in that field or had a solid understanding of like the community that they were moving into. I think I kind of fall into that bucket. I mean, with HillVets, I didn't, I'd been very engaged in the VSO veteran community. I frankly wasn't really intending to start a nonprofit. I was just trying to bring the community I knew together. And then we kind of identified a bigger need as we kind of went along with that, and then decided to kind of formalize that community. So it was very organic in that capacity. With my lobbying firm, I mean, similarly, I mean, I'd been in the space for, I don't know, probably about 8 years at the juncture that I'd started. I'd worked on the Hill, I'd worked for the VA, I'd worked for all the nonprofits. And so, but I also had a first client, I had somebody
Mhm.
approach me and be willing to kind of be money, right out of the gate, so it was, I applaud folks who have like bigger, hairier, crazier business ideas. I've never personally been that person. I'm a little more
Mhm.
conservative in terms of like, okay, is there a need? Am I fundamentally being asked to do something or pulled to do something that I know people would be willing to pay me for? And I think always thinking, I guess in terms of additional advice, I think always be thinking about, the problem you're being paid to help with. Um, and I don't know, more will come to me. I had another one, but it like just kind of slipped off my slippery brain.
That's great. It's fascinating to kind of hear how, things grew organically, how you're focused on fixing a problem, focused on filling a need, and then how you formalize that. So I connected with you through HillVets, a fantastic organization. If folks, haven't checked it out, they should definitely check it out. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of HillVets growth? What are some of the milestones you're most proud of? If someone's interested, how can they get involved? That type of thing.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, I mean, we really did, and I kind of touched upon this, but we very much, started as me kind of reaching out to people I knew, and I felt like there wasn't really there were incredible organizations and missions and all of that in DC, but there was, whenever there was an event, it was an event for like this organization and whatever they were pushing, or this, that, or the other. But there really wasn't anybody that was kind of bringing everybody together and kind of like we have HillVets is non-issue oriented, so you won't see us like advocating for, this issue or that issue. We're bipartisan. So
Mhm.
in basic, we're a community for everybody. Everybody can
Mhm.
come to our events. We have a HillVets happy hour tonight. So if you get this up tonight, no, I'm just kidding. Might be the next one, but if you go to hillvets.org, you can find our list of events. Um, and yeah, so we really just started with that community component
Mhm.
in mind. And what we started seeing were men and women, young, old, and when I say old, that's not very nice, but like, retirees, service member retirees, some were old. But we started really seeing a lot of OEF, OIF vets who were coming to DC. They wanted to continue their service. They wanted to work on Capitol Hill, and they were coming to our event because they thought they might find like-minded folks, and they
Mhm.
were right. Um, so we worked with Congress. I was still with Congress then, so I worked on creating a caucus to help veterans get fellowships on Capitol Hill. And so we didn't have any money, so we figured we would try to create a congressional program
Mhm.
that was also not funded to help out. And it did raise some awareness. We got some members of Congress involved, and we did launch, the first class, which we kind of now claim to be the first HillVets class of fellows. And yeah, so if you fast forward a little bit, we recognize that there was this need to help veterans get their start on the Hill. And one of the biggest things that we could do if we had money was to help them with housing, because DC housing is insane. And then the other component being we could help them network. So if we could help them network and meet the right people, if we could help them with housing, and then I'd say a third leg of that is if we can educate Congress, staffers,
Mhm.
lawmakers to the value of these veterans, so that we can kind of open up this pipeline and help them land positions, we would be helping a lot. And so it was kind of along those markers that we really decided to turn HillVets into a nonprofit,
Mhm.
because we fundamentally, we were like, okay, if we're going to become a formal nonprofit, we need to answer this question of like, why would we raise money? What would we
Right.
do with the money?
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. And we won a pitch competition. using HillVets House as the the pitch, and we won. I want to say it was $20,000 or $30,000, and then we took that to DAV and Wounded Warrior Project, and we asked them to match that gift, and they did. And so we were at about 90 grand in the bank, and then we went and opened an apartment in Arlington, Virginia, and we called it HillVets House. And
Oh,
it was HillVets House for about I don't know, I think 3 years. And I always joked it was like Jersey Shore meets House of Cards, and then you sprinkle veterans on top. And the apartment fellows, they're some of our best fellows. They have amazing stories. And but then we were fortunate. We continued to grow. We brought in some amazing partners, and we launched HillVets House 2.0, which is a beautiful home right on Capitol Hill. We built it out. It's a 4-story townhouse, has a community center in the bottom, and we house up to 8 fellows there. And we serve veterans, service members, spouses, and survivors, if any of your listeners are interested. And it's amazing. I mean, you can walk to Capitol Hill, House or Senate, in probably about, I don't know, 15 minutes, or bike ride like 5 minutes.
it's fascinating to hear how you took this barrier that veterans and the veteran community were facing, kind of trying to get started on Capitol Hill, housing being just, off the charts. And that by fixing that and providing those network connections, that y'all have been able to impact so many. Because I think that's just a great example of how it was like a big problem, like veterans not having the input on Capitol Hill, not having the representation. And then y'all just kind of like broke it down into, okay, what's the tangible holdup here? And let's just fix these. So I think it's really neat. And I think it can be really inspiring to folks that feel like life is a lot of big problems, and they're like, oh, that's too big for me to fix it. And as you're talking, kind of walking us through, I'm thinking, well, Justin just like took it back to stripped it all down to the big holdup, and then starts attacking it there. So I think that's a really neat to hear the process behind that.
Yeah, and I think it's also the benefit of being a small organization, Hannah. I mean, it's like, I don't know that I think as like a big corporate. I don't have like a big corporate business
Yeah.
mind. I'm just like, okay, these guys are struggling because they're running out of money because they can't afford rent.
Yeah.
And so let's buy them a house. And I think
Yeah.
if I was a big corporate guy, I'd be like, the first thing I'd probably land on would be like risk.
Oh, there you go.
Like, absolutely not, absolutely not. I'm out. They jumped the ship. They jumped.
That's funny.
And so, I think, I think sometimes, there's a real advantage to being small, and to being able to be both fast as well as creative.
Yeah, y'all can be so agile, and so you can be so relevant, so quickly.
Yeah.
So I know, every career journey has its hurdles. Can you tell us about maybe some of the biggest obstacles you faced in your career and kind of how you overcame them?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. There's definitely been a lot. Let me see. I just need to flash to my 20s and 30s to answer this for sure.
Give a replay. All those lessons learned were not fun to learn, were they?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially as a young male, I think your ego can get you in a lot of trouble. I mean, I think taking yourself too seriously, and it's tough because when you're young, and I think it's probably true of women as well. I'm not trying to be too gender specific, but I think you're trying to establish yourself, right? You're trying to get out there. You're trying to prove to people that I can kick butt and I can do these things. And I think, learning how to do that in a way that, keeps your ego in check is really, really positive. So I think having some people around you that will, bring you back to the ground level, even if you're a rock star, and doing big things is really important. I think, I don't know that it's necessarily a mistake I've made, but something that I'm always careful with, and I think about often is, and I think is a good way to kind of keep that intention in mind, is that at the end of the day, everyone's, replaceable. And what do I mean by that? I think I don't mean it in that like you should treat people like they're replaceable. I think that's an awful trait. But I think as a you yourself, you should always keep in mind that somebody else can do this job. You may be doing it great. Somebody else can probably do it great. And I think just knowing that, you're a steward in those positions, and that, hopefully you feel privileged to be in those positions that you're in is I think a really positive way to go about your business. I think, along those lines, I think, there are probably, I don't know, DC is kind of a tough place.
It is. It's shark infested waters in
Yeah,
DC.
yeah. I was gonna say, always be nice to everyone. That is like, like, I don't know if that will work, very well all the time, when you're in situations of stiff competition. But yeah, maybe we'll come back to that, because I'll think of some additional things. But I guess I would say, you're gonna make lots of mistakes, especially if you're um doing something like starting a small business or a business at all. And I think more important than probably the mistakes is not learning from the mistakes. I mean, I think fundamentally making sure you're trying to learn all of your learnings is critical. Because and I guess giving yourself some grace if you do make the same mistake again, because sometimes you'll feel like it's like deja vu, and you're like, oh my gosh, I did this again. Like, I've learned this lesson, but in your head, you felt like it was different, right? And you somehow, but after, like, it was different, you realized that it was somehow the same trap. And so I think, yeah, I mean, I've probably made most of the business mistakes at this juncture. I think, trying to make sure you surround yourself with, good people, I think is really important. I think one of the mistakes I made early on was thinking that, the smartest people were the right people. And that can be true, but I mean, they also have to be, the right fit for your team, and kind of the right cultural fit. And, so I think, in business, people is always a huge, huge component, especially in small businesses, because you're such a tight knit group. That can be really hard to nail down. And I'll think of some others, but
Those are great, Justin. I feel
yeah.
like the trial and error component of learning is one of those things people just don't want to talk about because it hurts, right?
Yeah.
So, and sometimes you make those errors, like you said, a few times before you really learn through that. So that's great. Great advice. I think it doesn't get enough attention of like the value that brings to you as an entrepreneur, or a professional trying to survive DC and make a difference that's positive. It's just really, really good advice. So I know, right now, April 2025, the public sector is just, there's a lot of change, a lot of chaos, a lot of unexpected stuff. Our military and veteran community is facing a lot of challenges that, they may not have forecasted for this year, or, they weren't experiencing last year. So lots of change in that. What do you think? What do you see as like the top concerns of today's military and veteran community? Do you have like, kind of key challenges or concerns that you're tracking on? Can you kind of share your insights on that, kind of what you're seeing as the pain points currently?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I really don't like how we talk about ourselves as a community and how we allow the broader community to talk about us, frankly.
Yeah.
I think the overall narrative as it relates to veterans is kind of this, um, broken, we should be taken care of, um, PTSD, they're suicidal, they're homeless.
Mhm.
And, I think there are certainly components of that are true, which is why, they're being spoken of in some of that context. But I think in some ways, the language we're using is making that problem worse. And I don't think we're communicating in a way. Um, I would just say, for another, young 21-year-old, Navy vet getting out of the Navy right now. I don't think we should be pointing communications at them that are, insinuating that, they're potentially a harm to themselves, or, are you suicidal? Without first asking, or I think communicating with them what we expect of them, what we believe them to be, what we believe the value they can add to our community is. And so, I think we really need to change the way we talk about veterans. I think that the VA needs to really reform how they are talking about veterans. I would like to see, more, highlights of the value that veterans bring. I think the stellar examples out there of, veterans kicking butt, and oftentimes that's short, of limbs, right? I mean, I know amazing veterans that would, outswim my ass in the pool, and they're, short a leg, like, but that are still doing amazing things in life and are still on like active duty as a military officer. So, I think we really need to do a better job of kind of creating a North Star in the community versus, I think in some ways we're kind of nitpicking ourselves to death by talking about, just this endless list of issues and problems. And I think in some ways it insinuates that we're special, but I think at the same time, it's kind of penny wise and pound foolish, I think, for our whole community.
As you were talking, I was thinking kind of in that concept of the messaging and the narratives, and thinking back to what you shared at the beginning of the podcast, and how, these multiple generations of veterans, World War II granddads and, Vietnam uncles kind of inspired your own like commitment to service. And as you were talking and, bring about like the 21-year-old sailor, it's like, what narratives are they hearing about service and coming back in? So, and that's just a great way to shed some light on, a challenge that is not routinely discussed in today's world.
Well, I mean, I think, to kind of summarize that, I mean, I think we insinuate that, and I think service members who've recently departed often end up feeling this way, that, their best days are behind them,
Yeah.
right? And I disagree with that. I mean, I think your best days are ahead of you, and I think your commitment to our nation has not or should not have ended. And and that's to your community, your nation, your family, your loved ones. And I just think we're not talking about it in that context enough. And I think I think my best days are ahead of me. I certainly hope so. And I continue to work hard to make that a reality.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating to hear how, that kind of the themes of service continue throughout your career. The kind of the messaging around, veterans are XYZ, the broken kind of veteran narrative that we do here. So, y'all just stay over here, like you mentioned, not bringing, not recognizing the value, whether that's to, private and public organizations or just that next chapter, of life, that post-service chapter and investment. So it's really inspiring to hear how you were inspired through narratives, in your own service, and then kind of continuing that through, because I think it's something that, to your point, folks do feel like, okay, the uniform's off, service contribution just stops here. And you're living proof that that doesn't have to be the case, right? There's so many ways you can contribute change across multiple sectors and really impact lots of people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what has been kind of one of the most surprising or fulfilling parts of working alongside other veterans or, veteran community members in your organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I heard the word surprise before you kind of finished this sentence, I mean, what immediately came to mind was just, if I'm honest, kind of HillVets. I mean, like, I really, again, I never had any real intention to like start a nonprofit. I'm a VFW guy, and I was active in the Salt Lake City VFW. I'm still a life member there of Post 3586 and Sugar House, and I was also at that time a person who, when I started it, I was actually at the VA doing congressional affairs. I was also a person that believed there were so many veteran nonprofits, and I still, I still feel that way. Like I think probably the last thing the world needs is another veteran nonprofit, and so I wasn't really, I say all that to say, I promise I was not driving towards a nonprofit organization. But B, like if you would have told me even when we were having, our little happy hour, first happy hour ever, and it was just like sending an email to a bunch of friends, and friends sending that email to other friends, that you would fast forward and we would like have this house, and we would have helped over 100 vets, get their start on the Hill, and that we would, have a leadership program, and a former Secretary of Defense would be the chair of the whole thing. I mean, I think I would have been like, you're nuts. And, so I think, I think to your point of, trying to find a way to provide value or service, even if it's in a way that is just trying to, be a bridge or bring people together or help people. And it can be something that's very small. I think, and being consistent in trying to provide that help or that value, and being committed to doing it if you continue to see that there's a need there. You might surprise yourself on what it turns into.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So how do you stay motivated during, difficult times when you've got that baby business or that, the nonprofit idea? How do you stay motivated? How do you inspire your team to kind of keep pushing forward in the sea of, veteran nonprofits? Can you give us some insight into what kind of keeps you on course with the hard work?
Yeah. Well, I think the honest truth is you don't.
There you go.
I think that I think success really kind of looks like a sine wave, and kind of bottom corner here to top corner here situation. And I think understanding that is important. I think understanding that you're not always going to be able to be on is important. For me, it's been, before HillVets, I was a very, I would call myself a I used to joke there are kind of two horses in Washington. There are work horses and show horses. And you know, I've always considered myself to be kind of a behind the scenes workhorse kind of guy. I mean, I saw the talking heads in our community, obviously. I know all of them, generally. And, you know, and that's not to say they didn't work their butts off to get where they're at. But, you know, I just had I had a hard time kind of becoming or being, and still don't love it all the time, being like the public person. Like I'd rather, you know, work my butt off, be in the background. But, you know, it started to become unrealistic when you have to raise a bunch of money for, you know, a house or whatever. And so, you know, you kind of grow into those things. But I think knowing how to kind of re-energize yourself, or how to take breaks, or how to know when to take breaks, is really important. And so for me, and I think that's different for different people. You know, like I wish there was some magic sauce to be like, this is how you stay motivated all the time. You know,
That perfect workout, Justin.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a book on Amazon you can buy, and you know, it's like you know, you sip a special tea at 7 a.m., you know, and then you do, you know, something else at 7:16. But I think the reality is, you know, you have to find time to recharge your batteries in whatever way that means for you. For me, it's kind of I kind of try to like disappear and like turn off phones and like kind of go into a cave. If you know, if there was a cave I could find, that would be helpful. I mean, I climb a lot. I kind of do a lot of outdoor stuff, and you know, so if I can go disappear into southern Utah or something, like those things are all regenerative for me. But you know, again, I think it's kind of figuring out your cadence. Like I'm somebody that does really well that, you know, I can kind of go 125%, you know, until I cannot. And then I need to like fall off for a while.
So are there any resources, so, you know, books, other, you know, organizations, and you mentioned the VFW courses that you found particularly useful in your career journey that you would recommend for folks?
Yeah. Well, I will find some books for you. I'll give them to you. Maybe you can throw them in your show notes or wherever you put your things like that. I apologize for not having that ready. I think one book that I do really lean on for leaders, and that our teams here at HillVets and Nimitz Group use, is the 13 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. We really enjoy that book. One of the books that I always share with our lead cohort is Struggle Well by Ken Falk, the founder of Boulder Crest Foundation. I think there are some legitimate nuggets of just general well-being, you know, wisdom in that book. And I think the work they've done is incredible. And I think, you know, there's something to be said for, you know, depending on what it is you want to do and where you want to be, I think it's always really valuable to reach out to people that, you know, as we were discussing earlier a little bit, you think might be a chapter or two ahead of you. And maybe that's, you know, we think of chapters as, I don't know, a decade or something, you know, like a decade or two out can be really helpful. I mean, I have some really still, you know, good old friends that, you know, just think about the world in such a different way, and you know, can sometimes help you contextualize, you know, kind of where you're at in a more meaningful manner than you're able to do yourself. And so that might be anything from, you know, what's going on in the world, which right now it's obviously a pretty chaotic world, to you know, your own personal issues, needs, relationships, to, you know, business, or, you know, things that, you know, that you're interested in on the work side, and or a little bit of all that. So I believe in mentorship a great deal. You don't necessarily need to call it mentorship. You don't even necessarily need to tell people that they're your mentors. You know, you can really reach out to people, and for the most part, you know, if you apply a little bit of appreciation and I think respect and acknowledgement of somebody and their, you know, and kind of play to their, ego in a genuine way, most people will help you. I mean, they'll at least talk to you and kind of give you a sense of, here's how I got where I'm at. Here's why I do these things. And so I think trying to figure out a short list of maybe, some of those folks that would be in your corner can be really important.
It can be so grounding and guiding to have folks who have kind of gone a little farther than you, right, on the trail, and they can tell you what to avoid or what to expect, or even just that it's like not new. I know for me, when there's changes, I'm like, oh, this is a huge new, wicked problem. And folks that have like seen it before in previous iterations are like, oh no, let me tell you about what happened in the, in the 80s. Like, this isn't new under the sun. So this is great advice.
Yeah.
So
And I would just add to that, if you reach out to somebody and, they don't respond, whether that's email or LinkedIn or, kind of you met somebody and managed to get their card and they don't respond. I would say don't worry about it. Just keep going and try some other people, like sometimes you don't know what's going on in their life or whatever. But I think if you're persistent about it and you try to find some good people that, can kind of be your, the people that you look up to, I think it's important.
So Justin, do you have any kind of final words of advice for the audience as they embark on their own journeys?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just said it. No.
I know. That was pretty good, Justin.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think along those lines, Ken Falk, the founder of Boulder Crest, always says, you kind of become the average of the 10 people you spend the most time with. I think there's, a fair amount of truth to that. I can't really think of 10. Well, I do have a pretty good team, so they make up a lot of my 10, but I feel like mine's a little more, a little bigger than that. But I think that concept is important, just trying to find people that that kind of want to row the boat in the same direction as you, I think is really critical. And it can be really hard to do that. So I think and it's always a growing trait, but really trying to find people that help you with that sine wave of moving in the direction you want to move, but also kind of lift you up when you're in those dips. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your experiences. When I reached out to you on the podcast, I remember just thinking, I was like, well, Justin has succeeded in so many different sectors, and I found it fascinating to kind of get a peek under the hood into your journey and how you made that happen. So it's very, very inspiring.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Hannah. And I'm excited for this adventure for you as well. And you're going to have to keep me posted on how everything goes, and as well as on, all of your new, I don't know if I'd call it a hobby. I mean, that sounds like some heavy lifting.
The podcast is a hobby. I am a social butterfly who has to work at a desk. Well, thank you for representing. I know Justin is the first Navy veteran on Tipping Spears, so he is representing the Navy very well. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears. We hope this conversation sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.